On a warm, sunny day, there was some movement in the window of the large castle. Suddenly, a small child's hand appeared in it, trying to grab the windowsill. The young girl, who was still able to climb out the window, was tired and breathing heavily after several unsuccessful attempts. She was looking out the window for someone, and it wasn't easy at all being in the body of a 10-year-old child. But in the end, she did see some movement, and servants opening the castle gates. She saw several carriages drive into the area of her house. Then she realized that he had arrived after all. Sirius Hyperion, the younger brother of the current emperor, and his biggest problem. The servants only talked about how sorry they were for him, why such an innocent child, barely 10 years old, had to go through this. The girl listened attentively to their conversation about how the emperor had gone too far and that this should not be done to a child. The circumstances of Hyperion's birth are too unusual, so you shouldn't call him innocent just because he's young. Although he has imperial blood flowing in him, he is still a bastard, considering the former emperor's intimate relationship with his servants. Perhaps that's why, as a curse, he was born in the body of a wolf and not a human, due to his father's lust. Legend has it that the blood of wolves flows in the veins of the ruling Hyperion dynasty. In other words, Sirius is a manifestation of the spirit of a wolf that only appeared 300 years later. Although his mother died of an incurable disease, she was still a warrior who later became a legend of the empire. She wondered if the maid's words were true, if his mother was really a warrior, and according to gossip, everything would have been fine if the former emperor had no heir. But unfortunately, when Sirius was born, the place of the successor was already taken. Therefore, the birth of a powerful creature caused chaos in a society where everything was stable, and the next prince got rid of everyone who wanted to give Sirius the throne, including his own father, the former emperor. He got rid of him without a shred of conscience. But even after everything, he couldn't kill Sirius when he was still a baby. And really, who would dare to get rid of a child who is a descendant of wolves and has been waiting for 300 years? Having ascended the throne, the prince became even more sensitive to this issue, so he hid Sirius in a cold dungeon in an attempt to shorten his life. And then, when he turned 10, he was exiled from the capital to the Duchy of Loud, far in the south of the empire. Hardly anyone would dare to say that it was an easy decision. Even a girl could not do it, even though she is a member of this cruel family. But suddenly, the girl's solitude was interrupted when someone pushed her from behind. It was her evil wife and her brother, who were mocking the child. They mocked her, saying that she had gone mad and was sitting in the window, and that they could better send her to the mental institution. The girl was tired of hearing this every day, but she didn't want to get into a conflict, believing that nothing would help these crazy idiots. This was her family. Duke Loud had 7 children, and they were all very cruel and crazy. The first son, still young, went alone into the forest in the middle of winter to hunt monsters, but never returned. Seeing the body of his young son, whom he himself had sent there to teach courage, the Duke only said that he thought he was stronger but was mistaken. The second son died when he tried to drink a small amount of poison to develop immunity. The Duke was not even surprised by his son's stupidity. The third daughter, who was recognized as very talented, died at the age of 12 because she could not cope with the demands of her father, who tormented her with tests. Therefore, out of all the children, 3 remained, because the 6th son also died of a cold when he was still young. His older sister Courtney and his older brother Joseph, and our young heroine, who is trying her best to survive in this crazy family. Their father, the Duke, sat in an empty, dark room, calling his children together, telling them that sympathy would make them weak. He ordered them to get rid of any senseless emotions, and only then could they become one step closer to the place of the successor. It seems the emperor hopes that it is in this den of sociopaths that the boy will break down and die, especially now that Duke Loud will be his teacher. While the main character was sharing this story with us, her sister was screaming in anger that she wasn't listening to her. She had already forgotten that they were still here, and still continued to scream and demand something from her, so she just got up and walked away. If they ignored it, they would quickly get fed up with it. As she walked down the hallway, she thought about the new boy in their house, her curiosity about him crossing all boundaries. And she believed that even in this house, he would still put them all at his feet. That's exactly what was written in the fantasy novel she read. As a reader, she really liked this love story. Until one day, she woke up as the main character in it, and the one who gets caught up in the worst plot. She was only happy that she remembered the continuation of this story and knew her future. She decided to work out a strategy to cope with all the difficulties that still await her. And the fact that in her plan the family that gave her life will be destroyed is only for the better, in her opinion. Starting today, she will stick to her plan, lying on the bed and doing nothing but simply watching from the sidelines. And of course, following the shadow of the novel's main character, Sirius. She was comforted by the thought that very soon he would destroy this family and she would undoubtedly be able to escape from here. But suddenly, she stood up sharply when she heard someone's voice, calm and beautiful. It seemed to be the main character's. Sirius was standing outside her door, talking to someone, probably the maid. The girl covered her mouth and tried not to scream in shock that she hadn't closed the door, and she absolutely couldn't meet the guy. She decided that if she sat like a mouse, he wouldn't notice anything. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the silhouette of a man explaining the house rules to a new guest. Then both silhouettes disappeared, and suddenly it became quiet. The girl quietly walked to the door to close it before anyone noticed her. As soon as she grabbed the door handle and started pulling it towards her, Sirius appeared from the other side of the corridor and pulled harder. Unexpectedly for herself, she fell forward onto the boy's chest. Looking up, she realized who was in front of her and was very scared. He looked at her sternly, without changing his emotions, without saying a word. As she continued to stand motionless before him and remain silent, he glanced at her again. But he said he thought the door had opened because of a draft, and she wondered why. As soon as she decided to live peacefully, she suddenly came across Sirius. But now she can confidently say that he is handsome. Over time, everyone will praise him, saying that he's a crazy piece of shit but damn handsome, and it's impossible not to fall in love with him. And it was this owner of a sweet face who killed more than 10 of his fiancées. She understood that he was clearly a crazy piece of shit and that she should be careful, but it was too late. The girl frowned and began to apologize for her clumsiness. She continued to back away from him because she had already apologized and it was time to run away from him. But as soon as she took a few steps, he grabbed her hand and held it tightly. Having said that, she is quite nice and polite. She was embarrassed that a guy younger than her had just called her pretty. She pretended not to hear and apologized to him, thinking maybe she was wrong after all. But he repeated that she was very pretty, and her eyes dropped, thinking that he was making fun of her too. He looked at her sternly and said that she looked very much like Duke Loud, and asked who she was. She apologized and said her name was Elena Loud. He looked at her carefully and said that he knew her. She was the Duke's youngest daughter. Elena was talking about her situation in this house, but she noticed that the guy wasn't listening to her and was looking somewhere behind her. She stepped aside so Sirius could get a better look at her room. He came closer and asked if she really lived there. The girl nodded, yes. She was upset that he had entered her personal space without permission. It seemed to her that at his age, he should already understand this. Looking at everything, he said that it was exactly the same, and there was little in it that was interesting for an aristocrat's room. She continued to look at him in confusion, wondering if he really thought and imagined things so badly. Usually, those who imagine the room of the Duke's daughter imagine something far from what they saw, something pink and soft, but not this. In fact, once upon a time, a long time ago, everything was exactly like that, a small pink room with plush toys that belonged to her. But now everything is at Courtney's disposal, who was of course happy to take it for herself since she got used to it. She even started to like her current situation more than fighting with her sister over toys. And in order to bathe in luxury, she must first prove herself worthy to her father. And first of all, to please the Loud family, and the father's demands are not simple. Elena stood sad and looked at the floor, thinking about her predicament. Then she wondered again how long he was going to keep looking around her room, because she wanted to be alone. But as soon as she looked up at the guy, she saw that he was watching her intently, which scared her a little. Leaving the room, he said that judging by her previous answers, we can say that she has no disadvantages. But when he got too close to her, he looked her straight in the eyes, which made her nervous. And then he turned around and finally said coldly how useless she was. She didn't even have anything to say except watch as the boy left her room. The girl fell straight to the floor, very nervous about what had just happened. Sirius mentioned that they say there are treasures among the Loud family, the greatest of which is Loud's golden eye. Neither her brother nor her sister, whom he had already seen from afar, had anything like this. But even the Duke himself has none, whose gaze cuts like a sword. But this sweet and innocent child has bright golden eyes like in that story. He thought about how much she resembled the Loud family in appearance, but was the weakest among them. In general, he decided for himself that she would not help him in any way and would not be of any benefit. The next day, the Duke gathered all the inhabitants of his house in his chambers. He gathered everyone to introduce them to their new guest, and it seemed everyone was waiting with excitement except Elena. Sirius Hyperion, the younger brother of the Imperial Empire, stood there, looking down coldly. The eldest daughter wanted to know the reason for his visit, to which her father glared at her and said that he would take care of his upbringing. His children were very happy that the situation of their home would improve once he successfully taught the boy. The older sister wanted to be the first to congratulate her father, but her brother interrupted her, for which she was ready to strangle him. Only Elena wasn't satisfied and stood farthest from everyone, waiting for it to end. She thought about the terrible atmosphere in the air, which should have been a familiar thing for her by now. And to her surprise, the boy who had just arrived at their court and who had been expelled from his own imperial court. He looks too calm and shows no emotion. And she thinks so not because she doesn't see anything, but because her golden eyes of the Loud family have never been wrong when reading other people's emotions. The golden eye is bestowed upon the Loud family and has the ability to read other people's emotions, and the more golden the color, the stronger the ability. The current Duke also used his golden eye ability, and that is how he became the head of the family in the fight against his brothers. Looking at his eyes, there is a golden glow on a red background, indicating the special power of the wearer. The Duke reminded the young prince that since he was now on their home grounds, he must abide by their rules. After asking if anyone had any objections, he would become the prince's teacher from that day forward. Sirius only sternly agreed with the Duke's words, while Elena trembled as she looked at him. The boy also said that if he now became his teacher, he might no longer adhere to the formal tone. The Duke didn't say a word, but Elena noticed that he was trying to get the prince emotional. But then, as if nothing had happened, I was calm, not understanding how this was even possible. The eldest daughter looked at her father and said that she would help the prince as much as she could so that he would get used to their home as quickly as possible. But her father's answer angered her because he believed that they were not capable of even that. Ordering everyone to go and rest, the Duke headed towards the exit of the room until his gaze fell on his youngest daughter. She felt all his anger and hostility towards her, so she expected bullying, and he loudly declared that she was worthless and incapable of anything. She had heard it so often that she was used to it and tried to contain her emotions so her father wouldn't read them. The reason for the Duke's fierce hatred is that she received the Loud family's golden eye in the form described in the relic. These perfect eyes had a powerful ability to see all the emotions of other people, and moreover, it was so strong that the girl could even feel them. At this time, her older sister began to mock the young prince, believing that this was exactly what her father would have wanted. She tried to be rude to him, humiliate him, and hurt him in every way. But the prince stood motionless and showed no emotion. The woman laughed at the prince, saying that he was nobody in this house, and that was why he was given the lowest-ranking room. Elena expected this behavior from Courtney because she was never known for her kindness and tried to show her importance. In the eyes of the nobility, Sirius was just a puppet that they wanted to get rid of in the Empire, so he had no value and everyone who wanted to mocked him. But she was curious about one thing, whether he would continue to remain silent or would finally fight back against his new enemies. She did her best not to interfere in their quarrel. She wanted to stay out of it all until the last moment, and so she headed for the exit, not looking back so as not to attract attention, although she was curious about what would happen next. She was already thinking about how to get to the room as quickly as possible when she suddenly heard sounds behind her. The sounds of footsteps coming from Sirius following her, silently and emotionlessly pursuing her. She looked at his cold face and wondered why he was here, why he was pursuing her. And what about Courtney, who stood there speechless from ignoring him? Courtney ran over and blocked the passage with her hand, ordering him to stop, and he grabbed Elena's arm to protect her. Elena looked at him and was already starting to hate him, wondering what it was she was to blame for him grabbing her too. While Courtney already had a vein on her forehead stand out from anger, she did not hold back her emotions and hatred for the guy. The girl, thanks to her strength, felt all her sister's anger and felt embarrassed. The red light she saw around her sister meant the emotion of anger, and it felt like her body was on fire. Sirius was fed up with that crazy woman, and said he didn't see any point in listening to her screams and drooling. She smiled angrily, looked at him with hatred, and said, "Okay, if that's what he wants." But in that case, she advised them both to become allies to at least try to defeat her. And the brother, who had been listening silently all this time, laughed and said that it was stupid to try to explain anything to these losers. The brother reminded them that the youngest is just the scum of their family, who is not even considered a daughter. She is simply nothing. Courtney agreed with her brother, but reminded Elena that even though her father had told her not to move, she wouldn't live long anyway. And first of all, she promised to gouge out her eyes, which had gone to the wrong daughter. Elena immediately remembered these words. Her father, who said he would gouge out her eyes as soon as he had the chance. Every time he said this, she thought he would keep his promise. So out of fear, she would cover her eyes so no one would see them. Because of this life, she herself no longer had much desire to have such power. Because of this, she felt everyone's hatred for her. She felt it with every part of her body. The sister saw Elena's worthlessness and mocked that now there would be two losers in the house who could not protect themselves. She said she would be kind to them as long as they followed her rules. She would have said something else, but the boy told her to shut up and interrupted her because he didn't give her the right to speak to the prince in such a terrible way. Reminding him that even the teacher had to ask him for permission to speak informally. This fool didn't ask permission. Then Elena looked at him carefully, and not because of what he said, but because she saw the light around him. He began to show emotions, but it wasn't fear or anger. It was a slight irritation, as if a pesky fly was flying in front of his face. Sirius asked who came up with these stupid house rules she was always barking about, and why he had to follow them. Elena's mouth dropped open at how easily he put Courtney in her place. It was so unusual to see Courtney, who was suffocating everyone with her anger, find herself in a difficult situation. Having said everything he wanted, the guy took Elena by the hand and pulled her towards the exit, ordering everyone to disappear because they were annoying him. As soon as the door closed, she asked him to let go of her hand. The guy stepped aside, lowered his head, and apologized to her for his behavior. Elena breathed a sigh of relief and decided it was time to run away before those two madmen came back for her. She ran as fast as she could, but even after 20 minutes of walking like that, she couldn't escape her pursuer. He followed her step by step, and she got angry because she wanted to be alone. It seems he misunderstood her and thinks they are friends now, and that's why he's following her, no matter how fast she runs away. She thought maybe she should turn around and tell him to stop chasing her, but she was scared to say anything to this crazy person. But still, she dared, clenched her fist and asked him, "Why are you chasing me?" It seems he was even surprised and asked what she was talking about, as if she was the one who was strange and not him. She asked him again why he was chasing her if her room was there, and he continued to follow her footsteps. However, his face didn't even change, and he showed with all his appearance that he didn't understand her. She had already started stamping her feet in anger. This was not the reaction she had expected, and certainly not ignoring. And he continued to look at her without saying a word. Elena became even angrier when she saw the yellow light around the guy, which meant how much he was having fun and laughing at her. For a moment it seemed to her as if he could smile, although she thought he was as impenetrable as that rock. And he was also amused by her stomping her feet, and the fact that she was angry. That's how impudent she was. She blushed with shame at behaving so unworthy of a young duchess. So she started running up the stairs to get to her room as quickly as possible, and kept looking back. But he was still chasing her, so she ran even faster, screaming. She got tired and stopped. He told her he wasn't chasing her, and he coldly replied that he hadn't said that. Well, maybe he didn't really say that, but he still continues to follow her. Sirius, holding on to the door of his room, turned to the girl and said that there was no word about him pursuing her. But what shocked her more was that he would live in the room next to her. Then she remembered Courtney's words, who said something about a low-ranking room, and so that was the room next door. Sirius finally asked if there was anything else she wanted to tell him. She shyly and quietly wished him sweet dreams in his new place, but she couldn't think of anything better than to just run to her room and close the door tightly. She fell onto the bed and covered her face with a pillow, screaming how ashamed she was. She was ready to fall through the ground with shame for everything she had said to him. Elena thought she had completely lost her mind after the last escape, and how she hadn't thought of this right away. The girl believed that her father had done a terrible thing by letting a stranger's boyfriend live in the room next to her youngest daughter. And even earlier, Courtney said that her father forbade her from bullying the girl, and she was very upset about it. It seems like this briefly proves how valuable her golden eyes are, and she remembers how she ended up here. She was reading this novel and didn't have time to finish it when she unexpectedly fell into it. When she was born, she already knew what awaited her, remembering the plot of the novel. She remembered how the maid first took her in her arms, introducing her youngest daughter to her father. He looked at her emotionlessly because he was known for being heartless, and the first thing he was interested in were her eyes. And it was this daughter who inherited them, for which he placed certain expectations on her, and she could have justified them if she hadn't been the one who was reborn in the wrong body. And only later did she realize that the plot would also change, but Sirius would remain just as perfect and strong. The author wrote that Sirius, the main character, will remain true to his rules and destroy everything in his path. And there were also no mentions of the main character, because the main character was too cruel to create a relationship with. His goal was to be the strongest in every sense of the word, and families who insisted on marriage were executed. Among them was Duke Loud, who tried to marry his fourth daughter in an attempt to exploit the emperor, but was killed. And the current Duke Loud, having become a teacher for the boy, will make him a real tyrant, like himself. That's why he couldn't look at his daughter with a smile, because he himself didn't know the emotions of kindness. But once he still smiled when he saw that his daughter had inherited strength, and the only time he called her perfect. He ordered the servants to prepare a room for his daughter Elena, overlooking the eastern garden and closer to the sun. It's strange that it's all the same man, isn't it? And he really spoiled her with everything possible, and she lived in abundance. And one more nuance. In the original novel, the Duke did not have a seventh daughter. Perhaps that's why everything started so well at first. But she took advantage of this opportunity and lived in abundance, not worrying about anything and naively thinking that everything would be just that. It seemed like the same sensitive story where a tyrant father has a cute little daughter, right? You love them too, right? The Duke, who paid no attention to the other children, simply could not be happy with the youngest. And so she gradually believed that she was becoming the main character of a story with a happy ending. But all this lasted until one particular day when this incident happened. She joyfully extended her arms to her father, glad that he had returned early today. But he strictly ordered everyone to leave the room and leave them alone. How strange it was when yellow warmth emanated from my father, but for some reason today he returned with a fierce rage. She felt a strong inner desire to run away and just run away. The girl didn't understand how. After everything that had happened between them, she had such thoughts. The Duke squeezed her throat and began to strangle her, and she slowly lost consciousness. But before she completely fell, she heard his words with difficulty. "I don't understand a damn thing. If you were born with Loud's golden eye, you should have dodged the attack, felt it." And after that day, he put her through a series of trials. Every day was torture. That was how he tested her capabilities, or so he said. The Duke said what a stupid situation. The golden eye of Loud who doesn't have any magic and isn't capable of anything. Despite everything, she tried to hold on to the Duke, and only over time did she realize her stupidity, because he had no feelings for her from the beginning. All he did was worry about the golden eyes. But when it became clear that she was powerless, they began to mock her. And not strangers, but brother and sister. The essence of this crazy Loud family is actually horrible and cynical. But she knew, no matter what, it was worth enduring just a little longer before they fell at the hands of Sirius. By the way, Sirius is right behind her wall now, and it seems a little strange that they are now neighbors. Especially after this shameful incident, but maybe during tomorrow's work, he'll forget about it. And even before that, she hadn't seen such bright, kind lights in this house for a long time. She just remembered herself and thought about how funny her creation was, that she managed to make him laugh. Then she sat up in bed and looked at the wall, curious to see what he was doing. It's not that she's some kind of pervert. She just wondered if he also had trouble sleeping at night like she did. At first, she really didn't hear anything, but suddenly there was crying, and then tears started to flow. She abruptly got out of bed, unable to believe that she was hearing the crying from his room, someone who showed no emotion at all. Despite the pressure from the Duke, he still remained strong. But now he is crying. Every time the crying came from behind the wall, it got louder. What should she do? It wouldn't be nice to just go in. She tormented herself with the question, because she felt sorry for the baby who was in an even worse situation than her. More than anything, she wanted to know what made such a strong boy cry. Elena lay down in bed and covered herself with a blanket, trying not to intrude into his life, something still tormenting him. The feeling of guilt tormented her more and more. She decided that nothing would happen if she just stood up and looked into the room. Offering help, she headed for the exit, but as soon as she opened the door, she felt the pressure of shame again. And in an instant, she ran back to bed, jumping onto the blanket. She was afraid that if she did this, the storyline might change, and then she would definitely be stuck in this house forever. After all, her plan was to remain Sirius's shadow and do nothing. Elena tried to overcome her kindness and stick to the plot. And in general, while she was lying there, she counted dozens of reasons not to get out of bed, just like me. She closed her eyes, covered herself with a blanket, and decided it was time to sleep and forget about the guy. Those were his problems. However, in the morning, she woke up as if from a coffin. Her conscience wouldn't let her sleep all night, and she just tossed and turned in bed. The girl put on a cape, trying not to think about yesterday and start this day differently. After all, Sirius is the main character, and he, like no one else, can take care of himself without the help of others, as was already the case in the plot. Unlike Elena, so she decided to take care of herself and go get breakfast while she still could. But as soon as she opened the door, Sirius was already before her eyes. He sat on the window and looked at her, waiting for her to wake up and finally come out of the bedroom. She stared angrily and didn't understand what he was doing across from her room, whether he was really going to chase her again. Elena was confused that he still continued to look at her and didn't say a word about what it meant. She didn't know how to behave. Wouldn't it look strange if she just walked past? Then the girl asked him if he had slept well. He replied that he had, in fact, slept well. She decided that she had acted in a friendly manner and that it was time to run away before he realized it. But at that moment, he continued to look at her and asked if she had slept well. She didn't expect him to be interested in her, but she replied that yes, she had slept well, even though that was a lie. Under his watchful gaze, it seemed like he knew what she had been eavesdropping on last night, but the energy around him showed that he was in a very good mood, so she must have just dreamed that he was crying. In any case, it was time to go to breakfast, so she left quickly, and he jumped out of the window and followed her. She walked silently and felt like someone was following her, and it was annoying. She looked around, and he pretended not to understand what the problem was, and just kept going. And the energy around him was surprisingly joyful and stronger every time, and he looked even more handsome that way. Inside, she was laughing because his hair was disheveled and resembled a dandelion, soft and fluffy. Finally, she reached the kitchen, tired because it was so far away. She had been seated further away from everyone. When they entered, there was no one in the kitchen, which was expected because they arrived earlier. Only she waits until everyone has finished dinner, so she can be alone. Moreover, Duke Loud decides not only where and who lives, but also who and what will eat, and whether or not they will eat at all. She clenched her little fist and was already looking forward to them being destroyed. She smelled the aroma and saw tomato soup on the table, her favorite, and she was so hungry. She ran to the table so happily, but Sirius stopped her by grabbing her hand. He looked at her and asked where she was running to without him. She said it was breakfast time, and she was running to eat, but she had to put food on her own plates. They held hands and ran together. She wanted to show him everything here so he wouldn't go hungry. The girl asked if he understood everything, where to go and where to get food, worried if he would be able to manage on his own. He smiled and said that he liked how everything was simple in their house. She looked at him, feeling responsible for the boy, and realizing how much the Emperor had mocked him. She picked up a spoon and started eating, but felt his gaze on her. It was a little uncomfortable that he kept staring at her, and he still hadn't touched the food. He probably didn't like it. She was too hungry to think about it, but she couldn't leave him hungry either. The boy didn't look angry, at least there wasn't a red light around. Elena remembered the situation that morning when he was sitting on the window and watching her. He wanted to say something, or was waiting for something. She decided to ignore him and continued eating, wondering why he was so demanding of her attention. And yet, this cute little face couldn't stand it, and he started eating. But don't forget that at heart, he's a real beast. Even if the enemy turns out to be a blood relative, he will still be unstoppable. He's not the kind of person who would cling to someone like an idiot, so she has nothing to count on. Anyway, if you also count his crying last night, he continues to do things that she doesn't understand. While she was thinking, Sirius got up from the table and left silently, and she decided that it was better to stick to the plan and avoid him. Courtney stood in the castle courtyard and shouted to everyone what a monster he was. The sister's scream could be heard even on the second floor, where Elena was sitting and watching the situation below. Her brother Joseph was a little quieter, but she still understood that he had called Sirius a crazy scumbag. And if you look at his sword skills, you might think so, because he was crazy. She was bored and spied on Sirius's training out of curiosity about his strength. In this huge castle, she has absolutely nothing to do and no one to talk to, except for occasional quarrels with her sister, especially after the Duke stopped caring for her and everyone decided that she was destined to die. But in her case, a doctor was called and took care of her, unlike her older brothers who died in agony. This was a very strange act for the Duke. She heard this from the servants who gossiped about it for a long time. But after that, she again became the ghost of this house. She was either avoided or hated, a difficult fate for the girl. For her, watching over the prince and his brother was a great pleasure, especially when his brother was losing. But it was difficult to watch, and at the same time dodge the shrapnel that flew all the way to her as the prince destroyed the war equipment with his sword. The spirit of a wolf, in such a small body, that proves with all its appearance that the myth of the Hyperion Empire is true. Most likely, it's not just about unrealistic strength, but also about the fact that his field of vision is wider, and his intuition is like that of a predator. As Courtney once said, it's hard to see a person in him when he behaves like a real predator. He only stopped when he had completely destroyed his victim. This was his true form, Sirius. The father watched everything for a long time and ordered to stop. Despite the boy's success, he did not even praise him. Sirius turned to his teacher and looked at him, but at first he just watched him coldly. Elena was irritated when she heard that her father called him worthless and that he was wrong to consider him the best warrior. Elena was ready to argue with her father. She believed that the Duke wanted to say incomparable, but was mistaken. How could it be called unworthy if the prince fought and wielded a sword better than his son? The Duke ordered the knights to bring the counter. He had another test. The counter is a giant device for improving fencing skills. He thought the prince couldn't handle it. The Duke drew his sword and began to approach the prince, while the girl watched from afar and did not understand what her father was up to. He struck once with his sword and glanced at Sirius, showing off his perfect swordsmanship. He gave the guy permission to start, wanting to see him in action. As soon as Sirius struck the counter with his sword, it crumbled in the same second. Elena almost jumped out of the window when she saw it, because the structure was gigantic and strong. At this moment, Sirius looked confused, and it was noticeable even without using her power. As expected of the Duke, he approached and glared at the boy, calling him a wretch who had no place in this house. The girl was more disappointed in her father than ever, and then she saw him raise his hand against the boy. She couldn't look at it any longer, and immediately fell out of the window, completely crushed by the emotions. Her body couldn't even move. She couldn't imagine that something like this would happen in her first class. If she had only known that this would happen, she wouldn't have even gone to watch this spectacle. Because she had been subjected to violence at the hands of the Duke for years, even seeing it from the sidelines made her feel horrified and numb. She could hear her father's angry comments coming from the street, how the boy looked inexperienced and didn't even know the basics of a sword. Elena tightly covered her ears and tried not to hear a word. She needed to come to her senses and go to her room. The girl ran down the corridor as fast as she could, with her ears covered so as not to hear the Duke hitting someone else. Even in the room, safe and sound, she trembled with fear, thinking about today. She really wanted to eat. She had just had breakfast, and then she was afraid to leave the room after what she saw. She remembered that the book said that Sirius didn't even flinch, no matter what the trials were, and no matter how much the Duke tortured him. But I still wonder how he is there, and whether he had time to eat. Maybe he, like her, locked himself in his room and didn't come out. As soon as she tried to fall asleep, a sound came from behind the wall, instantly jolting her out of bed. She listened closer to the wall, and it seemed Sirius had just returned to the room, but had the training really been that long? She realized how thin the walls were when she heard Sirius fall onto the bed. Probably tired, she thought. She also remembered from the book that the Emperor even paid the Duke extra to do his best to bring down his younger brother. It's very strange, but at some point the sounds from the room disappeared, and it became incredibly quiet. Did he really fall asleep? And after 5 minutes, there was a heavy moan and very slow breathing. Even through the wall, she felt all his pain. Elena jumped out of bed and decided it was time to run to his aid, or else he would simply die. But she hesitated, remembering her promise to stick to the plan and knowing that the boy was strong enough to survive everything. But with each heavy sound, she realized that she wouldn't be able to sleep unless she helped the prince. Last time, she also ignored his crying and didn't find out how he was, leaving him alone. This time, she decided that she would not stand aside and would come to his aid. And in her grand plan, he was her guarantee of a happy ending, which meant that if she helped him, he would help her. Although it was selfish on her part, this is what survival looks like, and she can't let him die. But this must be done secretly so that her father does not find out that she is helping him become emperor. And his past life was already difficult and full of grief and suffering. Maybe in this story she will be able to change that. Even his teacher, who supposedly cared for the boy since childhood, turned out to be a liar. He reported on the boy to the emperor, pretending to be his friend, and even poisoned his food several times. Therefore, Sirius is extremely attentive to everyone who approaches him, and even to those who want to help. She stood in front of his door and thought about how exactly she should enter and offer help. And if everything is so bad there, then it's better not to waste time and look inside. That's exactly what she did, opened the door and peeked inside to see if he was okay. But what she saw almost made her heart stop. The Duke had crossed all limits of his cruelty. The boy was lying in a very serious condition, beaten and tired, and he was still a child. He cried and trembled, which wasn't the case in the original, yet he remained a young boy who needed care and love. She was afraid to even move and almost screamed. And really, what kind of lunatic could beat a child like that? She ran to his bed, asking how he was and what he needed to bring. But he didn't respond and just shook. His condition was serious, and action needed to be taken immediately. She checked his forehead, and it was very hot. It was not clear what the Duke had done to him, but the boy had a strong fever. In this state, he won't survive the night, otherwise he'll burn like coal. But where can I get medicine? Elena remembered that she had a few necessary things in her room, so she ran for help. Fortunately, she had previously been able to obtain some medicine that she had hidden just in case, and was therefore able to lower his temperature. She took whatever medicine she had, some towels and cold water. He lay still, motionless, shivering softly from the heat and feeling excruciating pain. She felt very sorry for the little one. And after all, her insurance couldn't just die like that. She brought a large bucket of water to his room, then medicine and towels. She rolled up the sleeves of her dress and tried to act very quietly and carefully so as not to wake the prince. After carefully examining the boy and his wounds, she found no words to describe the Duke's madness. The girl soaked the towels in water and wrung them out hard. Then, she pressed the knife against the boy's body, cutting all his wounds where blood was flowing. Then the girl got the medicine she was able to bring, and she made him drink it. She managed to do it easily and without difficulty to the guy, so as not to wake him up. Then she sat down next to his bed, holding his hand and watching him. Over time, she noticed that the medication was starting to take effect, and he was shaking less and less, and his body temperature was becoming normal. She finally fell to the floor, satisfied with herself, and exhaled with relief. The last thing left was the end. She took out the cream that heals all wounds and warmed it in her palms. She began to rub his skin with light movements. The boy's small hands were still quite fragile, but there were so many wounds and scars on his hands that she tried to do it as delicately as possible so that he wouldn't feel the pain. At that moment, the boy started crying. He was sleeping and his tears were falling. It seemed he was dreaming something bad. This made her heart even heavier, and she could barely hold back her tears. Elena leaned against his bed and continued to watch the guy. She really wanted to know what the hell he was crying about. The Sirius she knows has never been this weak, even in his difficult early childhood. When she was embarrassed and showed her weakness, he remained cold-blooded and ignoring. Now, being alone in this state, he feels his weakness before this world. The boy fell asleep more soundly and finally calmed down a little, but it didn't make her feel any better. When he slept like that, it seemed like he was so tiny and helpless. You wanted to hug him so much. So she grabbed his hand. That's how she wanted to show her support for him. She decided that if he felt much better, it was time to leave before he woke up. But the desire to be with him a little longer also did not leave her. The next morning, the weather was great, and Elena wanted to go for a walk, but here's what. As soon as she left the room, Sirius was sitting on the window in front of her, who seemed to have been waiting for her for a long time. She smiled, but something inside her tightened. She really didn't expect him to recover so soon. She asked him if he slept well, to which he didn't answer. but I asked her why she left her room so late today. It was clearly not what she expected. She made excuses for oversleeping and getting up a little later than usual, as if she owed him something. Then she wondered why he asked her that question, but again, he didn't answer. Jumping out of the window, the prince headed forward along the corridor, but she didn't understand a thing. And then the warrior stopped and said that even naivety has a limit, and she had clearly gone too far with it. In principle, as she had expected, his attitude towards her could not be called normal. The girl followed him, remembering how dirty and disheveled he was yesterday, and she rubbed his face until morning. He never opened his eyes all night and showed no sign of regaining consciousness. So there's no chance he'll remember her helping him come to his senses yesterday. At least she hoped so. But despite his slightly uneven step, he still looked better than yesterday, and she thought he wouldn't be able to move at all. And of course, it's all thanks to her care, but no one but her will know about it, so she will only be his shadow in the future. Still, she was glad to see her ticket to a better life. Alive. How selfish. They went to breakfast together, wished each other a good meal, and continued in silence. She was initially worried about what to talk to him about, but luckily, he was pretty quiet today. As expected, he wouldn't bring up the issue, she thought. But within a minute, he put down the spoon and told her to follow him as soon as he finished eating. Without any explanation, he simply got up from the table and walked in an unknown direction. She was upset that he had something on his mind again and didn't even explain anything, and she didn't want to go anywhere. Still, she had no better options and went with him to the training ground. He stopped and looked at her and asked her to stay close and watch his training. She was angry and even wanted to yell at him why she had to wait for him here. But it was just a wish, and she pushed it deep and meekly agreed to wait. He asked her what she was guided by at that moment, and then the girl understood what he meant and said that it was time for her and she would wait from a distance. Turning her head away, she hoped he wouldn't ask anything else. Realizing what nonsense she was doing, she felt like she was walking on pins and needles, and at any moment her father could appear and punish her for it. He noticed her anxiety and agreed with her to wait for the good times. She happily ran to the tree and sat under it, finally in the solitude she was so used to. Sirius's cold gaze appeared before her eyes, giving her permission to leave, as if he were her second father. And those words that she's stupid, exactly the same look as now, cold-blooded despite everything. But even so, she wasn't hurt by these words. In fact, in this house it's much calmer to just be stupid. Of course, if she had the option to simply run away from her family and not see them for a single day, it would be even better. While she was comforting herself with her perfect escape plan, her peace was interrupted by a smell. And what she saw a minute later put her in a stupor. The smell of blood was not just like that. Sirius approached her, looking beaten up. At first, she was puzzled that he had come so close, and the way he stood there simply finished her off. He was again covered in blood and had several wounds, but he didn't look upset. He held out his hand to help her up. Elena looked at him again and didn't understand why he suddenly extended his hand to her, but he was looking so intently that she could do nothing but give him her hand. When she did, he squeezed her tightly. But he remained standing nearby, and she couldn't even look at him. Under his watchful gaze, she was ready to die from the awkward situation that had developed between them. The guy finally spoke up and asked, "Is my hand very cold?" She laughed and said that it wasn't like that at all. Everything was fine. He continued to look at her in confusion, and it was time to break the silence and say something. Elena laughed again and said she just wanted to use her hand to stroke his head. It seems that's when she realized she screwed up and just giggled nervously. As he looked even more surprised, the girl said that he was a good boy and had done well in training. And only then did Sirius finally smile. His eyes filled with immense kindness, and he asked to be praised again. What put the girl in a stupor? I don't know what was more, his words or his emotions. He didn't look like himself. She wasn't even sure she heard correctly. She stroked his head, but knew that this sweet and kind boy was only pretending to be so. In fact, inside him sits that crazy tyrant who will soon show himself. Sirius told her that when he arrived for training, the Duke was very surprised to see him. He was sure that he was already dead. And the knight who introduced training and opened his mouth completely because he saw the state to which they beat him yesterday. Elena sighed sadly and agreed that yesterday's training was more like torture than science. And as it turned out, everyone thought he would die, but they were wrong, and therefore put him in a fight with a monster, thinking that this time they would definitely get rid of him. And they were wrong again. He destroyed the monster in a few minutes and wasn't even injured. But that's exactly why he came covered in blood. Fortunately, not his own. Elena didn't even need to see this. She already imagined Sirius fighting in the spirit of a ravenous wolf, but she didn't understand why he was looking at her like that this time. He stood up and didn't look away, wondering if he really wanted to ask something again, but didn't dare. But despite everything, he just got up and left, without saying anything in the end. Elena wasn't even angry with him anymore. It seemed she was used to this behavior. But there were also advantages to this. She could finally rest alone in her soft bed. As soon as Sirius left, she immediately ran to her room and happily rolled from side to side on him. And even better was that Sirius never once asked what happened last night, so he didn't remember, and she was safe. As soon as she closed her eyes, rejoicing that she had successfully hidden herself, she tried to fall asleep. But at that very moment, some sounds began to come from the corridor, the maids outside her door. She returned to the place where everything had happened, and in front of her on the bed was Sirius, again lying, choking on his own blood. Winnie lay motionless, a picture that she managed to piece together after overhearing the maid's conversation. Sirius's chaotic sword skills began to improve under the Duke's guidance. Although he was stubborn from the very beginning, and trained until he lost consciousness, he still came to them every day. His innate spirit combined with undeniable talent could not go unnoticed. Everyone without a doubt called him a genius, and even Duke Loud himself began to show interest in him. Therefore, Joseph, who used fencing skills as his main skill, began to worry about being second place. It was in this situation that Duke Loud ordered Sirius and Joseph to compete with each other, exploiting his son's jealousy. The Duke would have preferred to see his son victorious, and therefore put pressure on him, and Joseph, under the influence of his father, completely lost his sanity. Therefore, he attacked Sirius before the fight was allowed to begin, but he had time to react. Despite his son's violation of the rules, the Duke did not stop the fight and continued to watch. And at that moment, a bewildered Sirius glanced at the Duke, waiting for the battle to stop. Joseph used his sharp sword to cut into the boy's body, although he managed to partially dodge the blow and avoid a stab wound. But the one that penetrated his body still made him fall and grab his stomach, while everyone watched to see what would happen next. The Duke threw an irritated look in his direction and said that he was worthless and could not even take a blow with dignity. Still, he finished the fight and told his son that he would be punished for breaking the rules. And after a little longer silence, he turned to Sirius and said that in general he had behaved well. Luckily, he's unconscious again, and she can do what she has to do and escape before he wakes up. She opened his shirt and saw severe wounds all over his body, especially on his stomach. After treating the wounds, she applied bandages from a blanket she had managed to steal from the maid. Although she had entered his room, it was with the best of intentions, after she had overheard the conversation between the two maids. They believed it was entirely possible that Joseph had forbidden the doctor from examining Sirius so that he would leave them sooner. But she knew the young prince didn't have much longer to endure. After shedding a few tears, she examined the boy's body and shouted at him, "You promised to take revenge for everything, because that's what the book said." She ordered him that he had no right to die, at least not now. Her tears were already flowing like a river, and she began to wipe them with her sleeves. Noticing that the bandages were gone and the wound was bleeding, she decided to get more. But at that very moment, the boy grabbed her hand, which scared her to death. Looking back, she noticed that he had come to his senses and was holding her hand. He woke up and seemed very angry, his eyes shining with hatred. She decided that she was in danger, because she had to leave before he woke up. She should have run but couldn't move, and he rudely asked her what it all meant. She excitedly giggled that she was wrong, but had no explanation for him, and she tried to escape, pulling her hand away from him. But Sirius was stronger. To prevent her from running away, he pulled her hand towards him, with all the strength he still had left, and in a second she was on top of him. It seems neither of them were expecting this. The only thing that worried the girl was his wound, which she was afraid to touch and hurt him. Their eyes met as close as ever, too close to each other. She didn't know what to do, because she couldn't move. Her body simply wouldn't let her. So I couldn't think of anything better than to just close his eyes and tell him that he had dreamed it. He asked, confused, what she was doing, and he laughed out loud. He giggled so loudly that she was afraid the servants would hear. The girl was still standing over him, holding his eyes, but she couldn't believe he was laughing at her again. And she felt ashamed again. Couldn't she have come up with a better explanation for her actions, she thought? Then she closed her eyes and said that it was all a dream, trying to believe her own words. He could barely hold back his laughter when she said this, begged him to go back to sleep because it was a dream, and even started singing a lullaby. He let go of her hand, closed his eyes, and relaxed, as if he were truly asleep. She removed her hands, stood up a little, and looked to see if he was really asleep. For a second, she even believed she had a talent for hypnosis. The girl quickly got out of bed, trying to escape this situation, which she should have done much earlier. As she ran away, Elena thought only about whether he would remember her tomorrow when he woke up. His eyes at that moment were looking at her, the one who was helping him without any reason and without the slightest caution. It seems she made a huge mistake when she stepped out of the main character's shadow and allowed herself to help him. And as soon as she didn't foresee this, because her golden eye warns her about the future, but being preoccupied, she didn't pay attention to it. Then, it seemed to her that there was no other way out but to run away. She started packing her suitcase, but when she opened it, she thought, where could a 10-year-old child live? Besides, her father would be looking for her. And most of all, she didn't want to leave him alone, because despite the whole plot in the book, the boy wouldn't be able to handle it on his own. She watched him closely. His condition seemed to have improved a little, but his face was still pale. Elena put a new bandage on him, wiped her forehead wearily, and realized that she couldn't run away until she was sure he would survive. Walking down the corridor, pleased with herself, she thought that maybe Sirius would spare her when he dealt with her crazy family. But luckily she has a golden eye, and maybe if he lets her go, she'll be able to cope. And besides, if there are even the slightest changes in this house, she will anticipate it and run away earlier. As expected, the next morning, upon opening her door, the first person she saw was Sirius. As if nothing had happened, he was sitting on her windowsill, and a minute earlier, when she was in the room, she thought about all the possible things she could get to hand over and get money. As it turned out, she didn't have any such items. The only things she could sell were medicines and tools. The only question is whether anyone will buy medicine from a child, right? The only hope right now is that Sirius won't do anything to her, since she took care of him. It seemed like there was still a little time left. She thought that was a good argument not to touch her now. When Vaughn thought about it, she decided it was time to go have breakfast, but she opened the door cautiously because she knew that Sirius might be waiting for her outside the door. That was true, but in addition to that, she smelled the smell of blood coming directly from him. Looking at his legs, she noticed how blood was slowly draining from them and dripping onto the hallway floor. But he just casually asked if she slept well. At first, she breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he would ask about yesterday, but he was just worried about her sleep. And only a minute later, she remembered why she had just smelled blood. His wound was still bleeding. It was safe to say that yesterday was definitely not a dream, and the wound was more serious than she thought. She didn't know how to tell him that he could die with such a wound, so he needed to stay in bed for at least a week. But the strangest thing was that he didn't even seem to feel the pain or think about it. There was a smile on his face, and the aura around him glowed with warm colors, signifying his good mood. She barely had time to say anything when he jumped out of the window and headed down the corridor. Seeing that Elena wasn't following him, he turned around and said that it was time for them to have breakfast. It seemed to her that he was getting stranger every time. He had never met her in the morning with a smile and a good mood. She followed behind, but tried to keep her distance, thinking he was just testing her to see how fearless she was. But no matter how much she tried to walk slower and stay further away, he still adjusted to her pace. She frowned, feeling like she was on a leash with the prince and had nothing to do. And at some point, he asked if she wanted to tell him something, surprising her greatly. Since she didn't answer him right away, he stopped and asked her again if she had anything to say, but she waved her hands to say no. He watched her strange, frightened movements, and she was chattering as if it was already time for breakfast, and they were running late. In the kitchen, Sirius began to pour them soup himself, which made her even more confused. Everything around him glowed bright yellow, and he radiated a very good mood. And when they sat down at the table, he wished her a delicious meal, and she wished him a delicious meal in return. But she didn't understand why he was behaving like that, and she didn't know how to behave towards him. Maybe he really believed that yesterday was a dream, and it would be easier if she didn't know the plot and just lived life. While they were eating mushroom soup, someone knocked on the kitchen door. The maid entered, carrying 2 dishes that smelled very appetizing. She put them on the table in front of the children and said that the Duke had told him to get well soon and that these dishes were for him. When she opened them, they saw juicy meat, the likes of which they had never eaten before in their lives. But it smelled incredible. Elena was afraid that the food might be poisoned and waited for the maid to leave. However, Sirius decided to try it anyway and handed a piece to Elena. When she took a piece of meat into her mouth, she became speechless. She had never eaten anything more delicious in her life. So while there was such an opportunity, she savored every bite, knowing that the next time might not be soon. Sirius looked at her with a smile and concern, and it was then that he dared to speak. He confessed to her that he had dreamed of her that night. Elena almost choked on her food. She almost threw up. She was so excited about what he would say next. He also admitted that this was not the first time he had dreamed of her. She pretended to be surprised. He even said that he remembered how, in the last dream, she held his hand. Then she realized that the first time she saved him, she had been mistaken in thinking he was asleep. Vaughn took his hand unconsciously when she saw him crying, thinking it was Autumn. Sirius, having told his dreams, waits for some answer from Elena. But she remained silent, lost in her thoughts, so he himself asked why she was silent and did not answer anything. And she was embarrassed, and it seemed like they had never talked for so long as they did now. It was even somehow unusual, but she asked him what the dream she had was about. Sirius looked at her like she was stupid and said it was just a good dream. She asked if it was just a good dream, and without details he replied, yes. She wondered how that situation could even be called a good dream if she was saving him from death. Sirius changed the subject and suggested she try other dishes and desserts. He handed her pieces of fish, which he liked, but Eleni wasn't interested in that. And he knew this, so he specifically changed the subject and saw all the emotions on her face and knew that she was not satisfied with his answer. He smiled again and told her about the dream, which was very scary at first, but eventually ended the way he had wanted it all his life. They both remembered the day Prince Sirius arrived at the Duchy of Loudwell. Sirius's eyes gleamed with hope, for he wanted more than anything to leave the Emperor's court. Until that day, he was just a descendant, unwanted, and with power beyond the Emperor's reach. Therefore, he should be kept away from prying eyes, so that people will forget who Sirius is. He was alone, lived alone, and didn't talk to anyone. It's a wonder he learned everything himself. His whole life he lived in the moment, with the thought that one day he would be able to live a normal life like other children. To ask everyone how they slept in the morning, and at lunch to practice fencing with the other guys. And if possible, he would like to hear good night wishes, at least sometimes. The day he arrived at Duke Loud's seemed promising. For a moment, it seemed to him that his wish had finally come true. That was until the moment when he saw Duke Loud and his teacher for the coming years. If he managed to survive, the Duke seemed to him the same as his brother the Emperor, the same cruel tyrant. He felt every glance of the Duke, who analyzed him with his eyes every minute. Sirius felt as if a snake was surrounding him, waiting for its prey. And the other members of the family were no different from the Duke, just as crazy, as if he had fallen into a nest of snakes. Then he decided to respond with hostility to hostility. This is how he survived at the imperial court, and most likely the same fate awaits him there. As soon as he arrived, the Count escorted him to the maid who had prepared a room for him on the top floor. And as he climbed the stairs, he thought that this was the end of the changes in his life. As soon as the servants started questioning him and saying something, he simply asked them to leave him. That's when he noticed the door ajar in the hallway where he was standing, thinking it was a draft, until he pulled the door handle and Elena fell on him. He met a girl who was not much older than him. She had golden eyes, and she looked more like a true member of the Loud family than anyone else. But at the same time, she didn't fit them at all harmoniously in character, such a good child in such a home. Immediately after their first meeting, several funny incidents occurred, such as when he went to his room and she thought he was following her. He found it very funny and decided to tease her a little, so she blushed with shame and ran away. Then, for the first time, he felt that he was having fun, but his face still remained unwaveringly stern, so Elena could never guess what he was thinking, and then he decided to tease her again. Sirius asked if she wanted to tell him something. She blushed and blushed again, and then ran into the room. At that moment, as she was running away, she wished him good night, and he completely fell apart. There was no trace of his joy, not because his mood had deteriorated, but because of shock. That little girl had just wished him good night, something he had been waiting for years. Then he felt ashamed too, because he had been rude to her all day, and she had been polite all the same. He even entered her room and called her stupid, his fault being that he hadn't gotten rid of a habit he had learned in the castle. When he was defending himself, he felt weaker than ever, even more so than when he had allowed himself to cry. He felt completely crushed by the feelings that haunted him. Then he saw her look and asked what happened, but she hid and replied, as if nothing had happened. He decided not to insist and therefore simply suggested that she continue with breakfast. And she saw the light around him and didn't understand why he was suddenly sad when a moment ago he had been in a great mood. And indeed, she thought she knew him well because she had read a book where he was the main character, but she was somehow wrong. Because she didn't know what he was thinking, even her strength couldn't read his thoughts. She was in such a hurry to finish breakfast and leave that she choked on water and felt ashamed again. She tried to clear her throat herself, but he immediately ran over to help her. He slapped her shoulders a few times, and she was able to calm down and clear her throat, assuring her that everything was okay. He didn't realize she was choking and asked very excitedly if she had a cold and maybe she should get some medicine. It felt so strange to have serious worry about her, she thought. But I immediately started waving my hands that everything was okay and explained that I had just drunk water abruptly, but he didn't seem to believe it, not at all. He told her afterwards that she was really very weak if she had almost died from drinking water so suddenly. She laughed but said that maybe she wasn't the strongest, but her score was a little above average, so she'd be fine. Sirius put his hand to his stomach and fell silent. Then he said that his wound was almost healed. These are all advantages of wolf blood, which quickly heals the body. He looked at her and thought that of all the people who were weak against him, she was the most fragile. And she doesn't even have a clue that he remembers everything from the very beginning. He knew that no one could be good without a reason, but there was a but. Sirius asked Elena to take her medicine. If she had stomach problems, she shouldn't just pour water on herself. But she was offended because she didn't consider herself as weak and frail as he said. Still, she decided it was time to run away, smiled, and said it was time for her to go to her room. But Sirius had other plans and asked if she wanted to go with him to practice. And here she is again, as if he asked permission, but despite the refusal, she is still here. And it was all because of his smile. When he was in the mood, he radiated too much energy, and she simply couldn't refuse. He also suggested that she stay away from her father and wait for the weather to improve near the tree. She found a comfortable place and sat down, watching what was happening on the battlefield. From a distance, he looked so tiny, especially against the background of the other participants, and it made her worry. Although inside she knew he was very powerful, thanks to his wolf blood, he could simply tear an enemy apart. Then she was suddenly disturbed by Joseph, who was carrying wooden training swords in his hands, and also did not expect to see her here. She yelled at him what he was doing here, and to get out. He got angry and asked if she had just dared to speak to him. She thought when he would finally understand that even if his father recognized him as his blood son, it still wouldn't save him. He shouted at her that she was becoming more and more insolent every day, and that she had probably come to watch him serve his sentence. She didn't even notice that he was carrying a weapon. As a punishment, he was given a uniform and was performing servant duties. Elena assured him that she didn't come here for him, but it seems he wasn't listening anymore, angrily throwing down his weapon and starting to call her names because she doesn't even recognize him as her brother. So he decided it was time to punish her and put her in the place she had forgotten about. He wanted to see the fear in her eyes. But she didn't even look him in the eye, which made him decide she just wanted to ignore him. Enraged even more, he wanted to punch her, but noticed someone behind him. Sirius stood in the arena and watched them. He was seething with rage. Joseph couldn't believe that Sirius was now looking straight at him, his sword clenched in his hands. He was frightened and, pointing his finger at him, looked at his sister, who advised him to back off. She even felt the state Joseph was in, the same as she was when she saw Sirius in blood at her window. Sirius approached them, sword in hand. He walked silently, coldly watching Joseph. He took the boy by the shoulder and couldn't believe that he was alive, because yesterday he himself had done everything possible to make sure that he finally died. Elena barely managed to close her eyes, knowing that she didn't want to see what might happen next. Sirius looked Joseph straight in the eye and asked if he allowed him to touch his shoulder and speak informally. He took his hand away and seemed even frightened by his gaze, and in the prince's eyes was visible hatred, with which he was ready to tear his enemy apart. Joseph didn't say a word as Sirius walked past him to stand beside Elena to protect her. The Duke watched from afar and ordered the halt as soon as he saw that his eldest son tried to attack the prince from behind like the last rat. He looked at his father in fear, and Elena didn't expect to see him here, but Sirius didn't care. The Duke looked at them and said that he seemed to have ordered Sirius to rest today. But today I see him on the training ground. Did he really not hear the order? Although his voice was particularly soft now, she didn't believe it would last long. She had been haunted by a premonition since morning, and it seemed like this was exactly what she had foreseen. Sirius hid Elena with him and told the Duke that he had come to talk to Joseph. Elena looked at him from behind and understood that he was trying to hide her from the Duke so that he simply wouldn't notice her. It seems that at the very moment the Duke entered, Sirius looked at her to understand her condition. The Duke asked what they were talking about for so long, since he had been watching. Sirius said he asked Joseph something, but he didn't answer, and so Duke Loud asked what the question was. The Duke didn't seem too interested, despite the whole situation where the children were arguing with each other, which was very disturbing. The father looked at his son, who lowered his head, having nothing to say. Then his father himself asked him what had happened and if he would explain. He timidly replied that it was just a trivial question, but his father said that he would decide for himself whether it was trivial or not when he told the story. Frightened and stammering, Joseph whispered something incomprehensible, which irritated his father even more. And then, seeing his father's gaze, he quickly and clearly said that Sirius had asked when he had allowed himself to be addressed informally. The Duke laughed, and there were colors around him that meant how he was burning with curiosity, but behind this was an incredible openness, and it was better not to approach him. Then his face changed, and he told Joseph to follow him. He had something to say. Then the Duke turned and began to walk away, and Joseph had no choice but to silently obey. Elena was alarmed that her father hadn't even mentioned her, whether she should worry even more. Then Sirius grabbed her hand and said they should get out of there. Without asking if she wanted to or not, he pulled her along with him in an unknown direction. It seemed to her that he had lost his way, and she could only explain that he was going at random, just to get further. And yet, whenever she encounters the Duke, she thinks about him all day long. But today is different. She thinks about Sirius. Then she thought about her words, and was afraid of her own feelings, since she had begun to feel at ease with him. But what girl would feel calm and safe when a guy, even though he's smaller than her, puts his shoulders over her to protect her? Apparently, the point is that they are holding hands more and more often, which creates contact and security for each other. She was glad he was helping, but knowing the future from the book both comforted and crippled her at the same time. Elena had long ago decided to stay in his shadow and not attract attention, but now something is wrong. When they finally arrived, Sirius stopped and looked her straight in the eye and asked if there was a place she wanted to go. Everything was just as she thought. He himself didn't know where to go. He was just moving around the castle chaotically. Although she didn't really want to go anywhere, he asked her to listen to a great idea he had. Despite all her expectations, he still behaves like a little child, which they are, I remind you, Elena. Judging by the expression on his face, he clearly feels comfortable with her and expects mutual support. Doesn't this mean that her plans to remain in his shadow have definitely fallen through? And he asked what she usually does at this hour. She said she was reading books in the library or something. Are the two of them really going to spend time in the library now? That's when he took her hand and invited her to go to the library. But she was right. He wouldn't let her go that easily. He opened the door to the library and looked inside, while she stood outside, thinking about how she could escape. But he was careful to make sure that didn't happen and asked what she wanted now, but he saw it in her eyes. She tried to explain that she couldn't, because she wasn't able to read today. It seems she had prepared an excuse for him in advance. Delighted with her success, she was sure that she had done well and that he would definitely leave her alone. He looked down a little, looked down and thought. Then she got sad too when she saw this cute, sad puppy. He was trying so hard to make her change her mind. Like a little homeless dog, he made his eyes look more and more sad, as if he was asking to be taken in. But she knew that she couldn't fall for his charms, and no matter how cute he looked, she couldn't think she should leave. He saw that it didn't work right away, so he asked if he could wait for her outside. A voice inside her screamed no, but of course she agreed. He was delighted and said what a relief it was that she agreed. Sirius was beaming with joy and said to wait right here by the door until she was free. She smiled too and blushed at how cute he was, and agreed. When he was about to leave to close the door, he said that she was very cute when she smiled. It was nice to see her smile. She got nervous, and in general, What could be nice about him being so nice to her? But she thought the same thing about him when she saw his sweet angelic face. How cute he was. She stood at the door and waited. Maybe he would leave after all. She would be left alone and not think about him. Well, she finally came to her senses a little as soon as he left, and she immediately wondered where she got such a weakness for pretty faces. She was running here and there, thinking about how to get away from him, and in general, it was her own fault for being kind to him. It seemed to her that it was like a war with Sirius, an offensive operation in her appearance and her youth. She tried to gather her thoughts, but Sirius wouldn't leave her mind. It was still better than thinking about the Duke, but she still tried to remember that Sirius was his pretty face. In the future, he will destroy entire empires and anyone who stands in his way. So you need to be careful. Well, what exactly she should be afraid of, she didn't know yet. So Sirius was good at physical attacks, but he was also a master of mental techniques. It seemed to her that he possessed the minds of people. Even despite killing so many fiancés, he was able to get a new engagement without any problems. Although the boy entered into it against his will, and because of the emperor's wishes, further restricting his freedom. But it is worth noting that in the case when he did not himself seduce a young lady in order to use her for his own purposes, and although the girl continued to doubt the service's intentions, she still could not refuse the engagement. And she was not alone, so in general, to summarize, we can say that the service throughout its life was distinguished by dazzling beauty and hatred. In fact, in the novel, Sirius's childhood was simply used as a stepping stone to portray him in a more favorable light. His appearance as a difficult child, enduring all suffering, did not fit in with the sweet description of his face. Why did she remind herself again that she needed to stop thinking about him? Since she had already arrived at the library, she needed to read something. She picked up a second book, but still wondered if he was still waiting for her by the door. Still, she felt sorry for him, but at the same time curious, so she decided to open the door just to take a look. And when she was about to leave, she heard something behind her. It was her brother Joseph, who shouted to her to wait for him. It is unclear what happened to him after he left with his father, but he looked very angry. Usually, Joseph just tries to humiliate her in every way possible, but this time he was in a really bad mood. Of course, there were those who found her lifestyle ridiculous, so they tried in every way to mock her. And this time, she was sure that there was nothing good to expect from meeting her brother, and that's when he took her hand. And he asked to give Sirius this thing, and added that his father had given it to him. Because she was afraid that it was something dangerous, she refused, but she got angry and said let him do what he said. She got scared and covered herself with her hands when he wanted to hit her. But at that moment, she felt someone hug her behind, and opening her eyes, she saw Sirius. He hugged her, grabbing the thing from Joseph's hands. He was very angry and ready to tear it apart. Then he looked at the girl as if asking if she was okay. The plot of the second, he began to ask her for forgiveness, for not being there and not being able to protect her earlier. He was angry with himself for listening and staying outside when he should have been sitting with her. She tried to calm him down, even though I felt guilty because she was the one who made him wait there. She wanted to fuck him and stroke his head, but at the same moment, he called her name. And he himself raised his hand to stroke her head and told her to wait for him aside. Then she felt everything around him burn with flames. He was heading towards Joseph. He muttered something meaningless, trying to avoid talking to the boy, but the boy wouldn't let him go just like that. Before the prince could say anything, Joseph simply said goodbye to them and ran away. We are not the service who will just let him go after that, because he threw that thing at Elena. He threw that thing at him so hard that he just burst into tears and apologized. Well, it seems the service wasn't enough. He didn't want to hear an apology. He wanted to feel the blood. Angry, he wanted to show Joseph all the applications he had learned from his father. Blow after blow, Joseph just fell, rose, and fell. He could barely stand. He just fell onto the bookcase. The boy continued to beat him, while Joseph just cried, screamed, and begged for forgiveness. And then at that moment, all the books from the cupboard came tumbling down on him, and Sirius just kept looking. Looking at this, Elena understood then. He was red not because he was sorry, but because he was very angry. Sirius's blood simply rushed to his head, from the violent excitement raging through his veins. Joseph stood up and called him a saucer, and promised to tell his father everything. And he was also angry that he had been hit over some trifle, referring to Elena. Sirius will continue to look at him like an idiot. Let me hint that the conversation is not over yet. He also said that he didn't think he would be able to stand so firmly on his feet and told him to continue studying because he would receive a lot more. Then Joseph got angry and attacked him, but as expected, he missed. The boy grabbed his hand as hard as he could and squeezed it. And he barely held on and asked to be let go again. He was wrong, but still he was stupid. He didn't understand how this was even possible, why he couldn't even move a finger. He couldn't believe that the boy was so much stronger than him. It felt like his wrist was about to be split open. He was scared, so he just begged to be let go. Well, Sirius laughed and asked why he would do that. And with one hand, he threw it back into the closet, and it fell completely helpless. And Sirius looked down at him and said, "Where has his smile gone now?" Joseph had only bad words in his head, but he didn't dare say anything in his direction anymore. But Sirius's only thought was how he could even raise his hand against his only loved one. Joseph burst into tears. He was very beaten, and when he saw him coming closer, he started screaming again for him to stop. Sirius stood on him with one foot and said that now he could apologize. The boy started stepping on his hand. He was putting pressure on it. Fearing that he would be left without an arm, he began to cry and beg for mercy. It seems he was seriously very pleased with himself, and here is the look that Olena was talking about, a creepy tyrant in the body of a little boy. Joseph continued to look at him. Sirius smiled again and said, "Is there any point in such a worthless apology if he's still doing stupid things?" And words can be used to make beautiful phrases, but they have no power to compel someone to act one way or another. This is knowledge that he acquired through personal experience and during his years in the Imperial Palace. Sirius wanted to continue to deal with him on his own, but then he saw Elena completely scared. He ran up to her and asked if something had happened, if she was in pain. But I thought about how you can stay calm, even in a situation where someone is being brutally murdered right in front of you. Watching Sirius, with his sweet angelic face, deliver blow after blow, she really felt that she was in danger. Well, he still didn't understand what the problem was. When he touched her head, he thought she had a fever. She understood that he had done this to help her, but she was still disgusted by what she had seen. Then he helped her up and said it was time for them to go. "I remind you that she is very weak." He took her on his shoulders and said that he would carry her to the room. But she doesn't like it. She tried to get off him to leave herself. She had no idea why Sirius had suddenly changed his attitude towards her, why he had become so kind. However, in this position, she felt the warmth of his embrace, and she liked it more and more. He let her go as soon as he brought her into the room. He asked her to have a good rest. She said that she didn't have time to thank him earlier for helping her. Well, looking at her so tenderly and saying it was a relief to see the blush return to her cheek, otherwise he would have been scared. So then she laughed too, but his expression still remained a mystery to her. Sirius asked her what he should do with Joseph. Although he got what he deserved, it seemed to him that this was not enough. He said he could come back and break her wrist. She was afraid at first to ask him not to do it. The boy didn't know how else to punish him. In the end, she said it was better to just explain to him with words not to hurt. But the boy asked her to wait. He had the best idea to solve this problem. He asked her to go with him. When she asked where, he replied to the teacher. He said he wanted to share with the teacher about their relationship. This clearly stunned her, but he asked her not to be afraid to take his hand, and they would go together. He said he understood her fear, but they still had to do it. Through her fear, she still agreed and decided to be confident. He was happy, and why couldn't she even hate him when she saw his cute face? At that moment, he grabbed her hand and pulled her along. At that moment, her older sister was in her father's office. She was talking about Joseph, who was beaten by Sirius. Kotalosha was very angry because he had been training him for several years, and it turns out that he was only capable of being a punching bag. Out of anger, he threw the lamp that was on his table at his own daughter. Well, she understood that she shouldn't feel fear because she was her father's closest ally, and only if she could endure all this would she become the heir. Having become the head of the family, she will take everything into her own hands and acquire the right to oppress and humiliate anyone who dares to say even a word against her. Looking at her father, she understood that only she had the right to occupy such an honorable place. Then the Duke said that they were all poor, and he would like Sirius to be his son. Of all the people he had met in his life, he had the most outstanding qualities, and he asked if she was in accordance with him. Beth lied when she agreed with him by praising Sirius. The Duke said no matter how much he thought about it, it would be a shame to just take him and kill him. So should he fulfill the Emperor's request? Even now, despite the ability of the Golden Eye, the ducal family of Loud was subordinate to the imperial house of Hyperion. Even if every member of the Loud family is good at reading human emotions, they won't be able to reset the Hyperion clan, where all the demigods are. However, no child with inherited wolf blood has appeared for a long time, except for Sirius, who now obeys the Loud family. Then the Duke decided that a more perfect moment could not be imagined. He has no choice but to make Sirius a man of the Loud family. The easiest way to achieve this goal is marriage, and he has just one daughter, or rather, two. At that moment, a servant came to him and said that Sirius and Lady Elena were asking to meet. He was glad because they were just when he thought of them, so he said they could come in. When they entered the room, Courtney immediately left, but she decided that a little later, she would definitely find out what these little ones were up to. They held hands, greeted their father, and apologized for coming so late. As expected, there was not a drop of fear in the prince's gaze. The Duke even saw the thoughts of his daughter's excitement next to him. As expected, but he saw nothing. Sirius knew how to hide his emotions, and Elena was a creature with whom his abilities did not work. He once thought she was special because she was unreadable, but now he just thinks of her as a loser. Then he asked why the two of them had come to him. Sirius reminded him that he had come to receive the reward, as something he wanted to receive now had appeared. He had heard that the teacher was going to appoint someone responsible for his homeschooling, which the Duke had confirmed. Then he asked that he would like to study with Olena, and that this would be his reward that he wanted to receive. The Duke saw them holding hands, and he thought it was strange. Well, he didn't realize then that the service had found someone to get close to. Everything sounded as good as it could be for the Duke. At first he thought of a plan, but the prince took the first step himself. Still, it's better than entering into a marriage of convenience, more securely tying Sirius into a relationship with his daughter. Elena, who he thought would be of no use to him, finally had the opportunity to show herself. He hoped that it would benefit him differently from what he had done before. And this murder of Elena's real father will turn out to be simply senseless. 10 years ago, he threw his brother Linos in prison, and Duke Loud himself, whose name was Hugo, took his place because they were twins. For someone who can't sit down properly to talk, his gaze is too lively, thought Duke Hugo. Even though they were twins, we were very different. One brother was very good, and the other was a tyrant. The brothers were fraternal twins, but their faces were similar enough that each of them could be mistaken for the same person. One brother never smiled, while the other brother always had a warm smile. Standing in prison over his almost dead brother, he said that he was somehow sad that his beautiful little brother was not smiling at him. It turns out that there was a very good condition that Hugo didn't like. He decided to take his place, especially when he found out that the latter had a daughter. He immediately put him in prison. When he told him, he asked her to call him Olena. That was his and his wife's decision. All family members, except the heir, were forbidden to continue the lineage. They could not create a lateral line. If there are children born with golden eyes here and there, then there is nothing good in this for this family. However, Linus fell in love with Stacy, a maid born into an aristocratic family that had fallen into ruin. He broke the most important family rule and escaped. After all, it was clear that the current duke knew no such thing as mercy. He would definitely punish them with death, and the reason they were tracked down was because Stacy was pregnant and couldn't escape. When he caught his brother, he threw him in prison before breaking his legs so that he wouldn't do anything stupid. That's why he came up with a very effective method of getting rid of his rival by dividing his family. As soon as the girl was born, her mother was immediately killed so that only the Duke would have power over the girl. To raise Elena as your own daughter, it would be more correct to get rid of her biological parents. But he decided to use the situation in his own way and offered his brother his daughter's life in exchange. That the real father will die. How did he say life for life? Of course, he couldn't refuse, and he couldn't trust his brother, so he agreed anyway. Olena's father never doubted for a moment his choice to protect his daughter's life. Therefore, at that very moment, he was pierced by his brother's sword. Well, in the end, he thanked his brother for leaving her in his place. A child with bright, perfect golden eyes. Her name is Elena. The story of the family and Elena was another person with the same eyes, and they said that he could see not only emotions, but something else. And this is nothing but future worlds. This story was a secret passed down only to the heirs of the family. But the child he often met and raised was a complete disappointment to him. Although she had perfect golden eyes, he saw no sign of any determined desire to do anything, nor any hint of ability. Therefore, Similar words about the perfect golden eye being able to see the future are complete nonsense. However, to his great surprise, Elena was able to enter Sirius's soul. Maybe the words about the savior of the family mean precisely this kind of benefit, which was also no worse. Elena lay in her bed and wondered how her father had agreed so easily. Isn't that strange? Maybe it was just a sad dream. Knowing nothing, there's no point in wasting time on something about which there's no memory left, she thought, and got down to business. They decided to take a walk down the street together. She was very surprised, but still she was comforted by the fact that her father had made a deal. She thought they weren't going to discuss it, but Sirius interrupted her, and they decided to confess something. He looked at her face and asked if it was really that unexpected. He leaned closer to her and said that, honestly, he couldn't read. She laughed because she thought it was going to be some kind of big secret now. On the one hand, she wondered how it was possible that he wasn't a street kid. Well, that's when she remembered that no one was interested in the Empire. The boy was devoted to himself. Then, she asked why they told her father about it. Well, he didn't want to, and asked her to teach him. As always, she screamed to herself, "I refused!" But she agreed anyway. Since she couldn't refuse everything, they now also study in her room. Because they are too close to the room, she cannot protect her personal space. And that's why he keeps breaking into her room, and it seems like he even enjoys it. The boy asked once she was his teacher how she would teach him, and whether they should speak formally. As soon as he opened the book and called her teacher, she immediately stopped him, asking if it was necessary to go that far, saying that she would be uncomfortable talking to him like that. Even though Sirius was pretending to be stupid, she could see perfectly well that he was just fooling around with her. He looked at her and said, "Come on, let's stop using formal language. It will be more convenient." But more and more often, she called her teacher, which made her blush. From the expression on his face, you can tell that he is more hinting that he has no intention of making any concessions. Then she agreed to talk informally and start their lesson right away. He took the book and they began to learn the letters for reading. He saw her blank look and asked what it was. She still dared to ask why he suddenly started treating her so well. The boy replied, "You treat me well too. That's why he feels more comfortable that way." She asked when it was that she treated him well, but he warned her not to refuse because he knows absolutely everything, even what she thinks he dreamed. And in general, there is nothing strange in the fact that a boy just wants to be friends with a person who treats him well. He took all the books the girl had and said he would read them. She was amused by how diligently he wanted to study, and she praised him for it. She admitted that she was a bad teacher for him, but still said that she tried and would do better next time. If she finds the right role for herself in the future, you too can become a useful person. When she asked what he meant, he said that useless people have no choice but to die quickly. So he warned her that to survive, she had to be useful. She felt a little comfortable around him, so she let her guard down for a moment, but then she remembered what he really was like. In general, he believes that I can do it, which is why he asked the teacher to let them study together. Then he said goodbye to her and said that they would see each other tomorrow. The girl still couldn't understand the train of his thoughts, but then she saw something in her book. Opening the piece of paper, she saw a note that he had written himself, where he asked her to teach him how to read and write. One thing she learned from spending time with him was that he sometimes does something cute, but as expected, he's a psycho. No matter what, he is the main character, because no matter what happens, he will still live well. But then she remembered that he had advised her to become useful. In this case, there was only one way out. It will show the service that it is completely useless. If she turns out to be a complete failure, be the first to leave her. The next morning, they were walking together in the street, and he asked if she wanted to play mother's daughter. She said she wanted to play with him. As expected, he was confused about what to do with her. But at that moment, he made her laugh by suggesting a game that he himself didn't know how to play. So she sat down to explain to him how to play this game. He seemed to understand, but somehow he didn't really feel like arguing with her when they played this game. When she asked what he was talking about, he said that he had heard the maids talking about the quarrels between the spouses. If they are husband and wife in the game, then they definitely need to fight. But she pushed him away, telling him to go to work, explaining that in this game they would fight. The boy came up to her and said he had come from work. She started laughing because he was doing it very upset. But she still congratulated her beloved husband, which made him feel uncomfortable when she said that. Seeing his excitement, seeing how he blushed, she decided that she was perfectly sticking to her plan for him to leave her. Well, I still had this strange feeling that she had forgotten something, even though everything was going pretty smoothly. They sat together and cooked food from leaves, pretending to be husband and wife. She suggested that he pretend to eat and really like it, how his wife cooks. After dinner, they lay down together, holding hands, pretending to be asleep. He felt sad that when they woke up, the game would be over, but he wanted to play longer because it was so much fun. He said, "Dear wife, I would like to play this game tomorrow too," which surprised her. She mentioned this boy is going to kill her, and more than 10 brides in the future. But now he's behaving like a perfect man, and that won't happen. After the game, she went to study, and then the servant stopped her. He said that Joseph had already come to his senses after that fight. He had a lot of injuries, but she decided to take this opportunity to make a deal. She came to his room to look, and realized that everything was much worse than she thought. Having said that, his hobby makes his life difficult, and he will constantly receive from someone. He asked why she had come and decided to start another fight. The girl said she just wanted to apologize and asked if he felt guilty, and reminded him that if he continued to behave like this, Sirius would notice that his apology was insincere. Joseph looked at her and asked if he truly apologized sincerely, would he be forgiven? He could barely keep from crying. She always thought of him as a little devil, but now he was very scared. She told him that she was not the one who would repeat it to him many times and asked when he would apologize to her. But he just burst into tears because he's very afraid of Sirius breaking his arm. Well, since her brother called her names again, she decided not to tolerate it and said that now she would lend him a helping hand by hitting him on the head several times. And she asked if he wanted to get more if he didn't apologize to her. She said either he signs the death warrant ahead of time and in front of her eyes, or he does as she says. Anyway, she told him to watch his language, or he wouldn't be shown mercy the second time. Since her brother had apologized, she happily went to see Sirius, who was already waiting for her on the street. And I still can't believe he calls this place our home, as if they're actually together. He took out the wand for her that she had been teaching him to write with, showed her how to spell his name, to which he said that he really liked how she wrote it. "Thank you." He kissed her on the cheek, and she immediately blushed. He said that this is how a husband and wife should behave in the game they are playing. They decided to take a walk and saw ants. She said she had read about them in a book before. The girl shared the knowledge about nature that she had read. And she also reminded herself that she had heard her father calling Sirius to her and asked why. He said that the teacher had warned him that he would be going to the capital for a few days to find him a new tutor. Then she suggested that he stop observing the ants and return to the castle. Today, he followed her closely and obeyed absolutely everything she said, which is why she promised to play tomorrow. They held hands while walking through the forest, and the girl said that she had heard that this forest had been there for over 200 years. But once she was here, she saw how beautiful the trees were that they seemed younger to her. And within a minute, she saw something shining in the tree, so they decided to come closer. She reached into the hollow of the tree and pulled out a small necklace. She showed the doll to the boy and shared her thoughts that someone had hidden it there. Although the pendant was rusty, it could be opened. And then they saw photos of a beautiful woman with her name written on them. Her name was Stacy. Elena clutched this pendant in her hands and immediately ran somewhere. She didn't even tell the boy what happened. She just ran away saying she knew the name. She was sure that she had seen him somewhere, and taking the boy's hand, she said that she had to go to the coffin. When they got closer, they saw the same name. She knew it was her mother. She heard that she had died as soon as she gave birth to her, and to this day she believed that her mother was an orphan. The current duke had only one wife, and she died immediately after the birth of their sixth son, so everyone christened Elena an illegitimate child. All because, even without knowing who Elena's mother was, one thing was certainly clear: she was not the child of Duchess Loud. She even filled in all the rumors they were spreading, hence the assumption that because the maid had the same green eyes as the Duchess, she caught the Duke's attention. Of course, the whereabouts of those maids soon became unknown, so rumors were all she knew about her mother. But honestly, a long time ago, I asked my father about my mother, and he said that she was just an orphan and nothing more. To somehow comfort her, he touched her cheek with his fingers and said that the woman really looked a lot like her and was definitely her mother. This slightly cheered up the girl, who also believed that it was her mother who made her feel this way. This is the first trace she has found that her mother left behind, which makes her heart pound even harder, and not just because of the boy. Joyfully, she took his hand and said that when she got out of the castle, she would definitely go in search of her mother. He asked, "Are you going to run away from the castle?" To which she replied, "Yes, she plans to." All these years, she believed that one day, when she left here, she would be able to find a real family, forgetting about the duchy. Then her father returned. He immediately called everyone to him, first of all mentioning Sirius and Elena. They didn't understand why, but he reminded them that he had hired a tutor for them. All subjects will be taught by a new teacher, Bacon Dalton, and classes will start tomorrow. Then he told everyone to leave. Everyone except Elena had a special conversation for her. She stood alone, waiting for him to say next. He reminded her that it had been a long time since she had spoken to her daughter like that. He knew that she had to go through many hardships, but from now on, he would give her back what she should have enjoyed. It was time for her to return to the main building of the residence. She was simply speechless upon hearing these words. She didn't understand why it felt like something she had faced since childhood, but why was he now being kind again? As soon as her father allowed her, she immediately ran away, a little child who still had no one to lean on in this world. First of all, because she considers the one who betrayed her real father to be her father. Therefore, everything will naturally be resolved in a way that is most beneficial to him. The girl could not believe that she had really been moved to another room and was now lying on a new bed. Finally, she is in a room that befits her status as a precious daughter, so why doesn't she feel joy? A duke is someone who only gives you something when you meet his expectations, but she has already done something she doesn't even know about. As long as children with golden eyes continue to be born in the family will not be able to save itself. Somehow Sirius will definitely put an end to everything. When she was about to go to bed, she saw that the light was on in the hallway, so she went out to check. It was already late, and Sirius was still sitting in the living room. She came over to greet him and ask why he was still awake. He didn't know why. Something didn't feel right, so he suggested she drink some warm milk. He was staring at her intently, which made her ask why he was staring like that. "Did you have something to say?" He actually really liked her outfit. She looked cuter and cuter to him. Of course, this embarrassed her, to be honest. She felt a little strange in these clothes. The girl was telling him something, but he didn't seem to be listening. She asked if something had happened, but he was just glad to see that she wasn't the only one who didn't trust the Duke. She reminded him that they were having tutoring tomorrow, so she wondered if he was worried. He replied that he didn't even know why he hadn't thought about it. He liked the idea of them being there together more. I was also comforted by this, but she was worried about something, and it was all because of her plan to be worthless. The boy asked her if they could sleep together here in the living room tonight, because it seemed to him that she didn't want to go to bed in her new room either. He was right about that, so they went to bed together, holding hands. He looked at her and said, "When tomorrow comes, we'll play a game where we'll make a real camp." But all she could think about was that she had never felt so good in her life as she did now. Is that strange? Why is it so good? Until now, all her thoughts had been occupied only with worries about escape. But now, Sirius doesn't seem to abandon her, even if she's useless.